Hello everyone and welcome to another Directions Mag Geospatial webinar, today sponsored by our friends over at Esri. I'm Barbary Duke, Managing Editor here at Directions Mag, joined by our webinar producer, Lynette Qualia. We encourage you to read the latest news articles, listen to podcasts, of course, watch more webinars over at directionsmag.com. We are excited to have Marianne, Lisa, and Jim with us today to talk about ArcGIS Online Map Viewer. Excited to learn something new. So welcome to the whole team. And first, over to you, Marianne.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Marianne Ferretta. I'm a product manager on the ArcGIS Online team, and I'm very happy to welcome you to today's webinar about Map Viewer, which some of you are very familiar with, and others with us today are seeing for the first time. But whether you're brand new to Map Viewer or a seasoned user of other ArcGIS technology, such as Map Viewer Classic, we hope you'll take away from this webinar new ideas about how you can visualize your data and energize your stakeholders with the techniques we show you today. And one theme of today's demos and presentations I hope you'll notice is that Map Viewer encourages energetic clicking. For everyone here who has been working with technology for many years, we can all remember a time when you didn't dare click on any new buttons, you didn't click on anything you didn't recognize, you weren't told explicitly to click on for fear of breaking something or the program freezing, or not being able to go back where you had been before you had clicked. But Map Viewer is a modern and nimble web map creation tool. Clicking is encouraged. And in fact, I think it's the best way to learn how layer effects and smart mapping and layered symbology can showcase your data and really communicate with your stakeholders. Everything you see today can happen with your data in your map. We're not using a special extension or plugin or any secret tech tricks or recordings. This is Map Viewer. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, a senior product engineer on the ArcGIS Living Atlas team, Lisa Berry.
Hello, thank you very much. And so I'm going to get started today. My name is Lisa Berry. I'm like Marianne mentioned, I'm a senior product engineer at Esri on the ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World team. Over the next 20 minutes, you're going to get a crash course on data visualization in ArcGIS Online's Map Viewer. Now, for most of you, Map Viewer can be accessed with the Map button at the top of the page when you're logged into ArcGIS Online. But if your organization admin has chosen to default to Map Viewer Classic for now, don't worry. You can still get to the new Map Viewer through the app selector at the top right of the page and simply choose Map Viewer to get started. Now, to familiarize ourselves with Map Viewer and the clicking, as Marianne mentioned, we're going to make a map together from start to finish. And now, the scenario that we're going to work with today is, imagine I work for Harris County, Texas, which is down here by Houston, and I'm tasked by my manager to highlight the digital divide with an equity focus to help with the distribution of funding from FCC and other policy initiatives within our county. Now, for context, the digital divide is the idea that not everyone has access to computers, internet, or smartphones, and yet these are critical tools for things like emergency response and healthcare, as well as education and others. So there are commonly programs to help address this issue. So let's go back to our map and let's go ahead and get started. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Map Viewer, over here on the left is the Contents toolbar, the dark toolbar, and this contains the key map tools to help you get started with your map creation. Now, you have the ability to add all sorts of different data types to your to your maps, including CSV, web services, GeoJSON, and you can even sketch your own layer if you want to do that as well. But in our scenario, we're not starting with any data. So what we can do is we can tap into what's called the Living Atlas. And instead of accessing data from my content, I can choose Living Atlas, which brings me to this huge collection of layers that are ready to use within my map. And now let's get familiar with Living Atlas just a little bit more. If you don't know where to get started, you can filter this data by one of the many different categories or subcategories if you are looking for a general topic. You can also refine this based off of your region and even the item type if you know you're interested in something like an imagery layer, a tile layer, or a feature layer. So in our case, I'm actually going to go ahead and search for a particular phrase that I might be interested in, which is current year ACS internet. Now, if you're familiar with American Community Survey or not, this is a subset survey from the US Census Bureau that allows us to look at socioeconomic factors throughout the United States. And now all of these layers are free to use and publicly available, so you can use them and share them within your own applications. So right away with just this search phrase, I get 17 different items that help me dive into this topic of the digital divide. And now because my manager is interested in also showcasing an equity lens, I might be interested in this layer, but I want to learn more. So I can click on it to see the metadata for the item to learn a little bit more about it. Right away, I can see some key pieces of information, such as these are 5-year estimates by tract, county, and state boundaries. I can also see a few things like what vintage is this data, what ACS tables are included, and when was the API call made to the census website. And once I'm a little bit more confident that this is the layer that I want to use in my map, I can go ahead and add it and just start working with it. Now, right away, I can see something a little bit interesting. I see that this layer is a group layer that contains, like the information said, state, counties, and tracts. And to get to the other geography levels, we can simply zoom out and start to get the key pieces of information, such as the counties and the states. But we're interested in just our county, so we actually are going to go ahead and just pull out this tract layer that we want and throw it right there. We'll go ahead and remove the other layers so that we can create focus on just those tracts that we're interested in. But right away, I'm noticing something. This map is covering the labels in my base map. So using this toolbar on the right, I can get to the base map pane, which offers me a wide range of different base map options that range anywhere from navigation, light, dark options, National Geographic, OpenStreetMap, or for this case, I would suggest the Human Geography base map. Now, what's cool about this base map is that it's great for mapping with thematic data, because you'll notice it just threw key information on top of that thematic layer, including things like freeways and the labels. Now, if your organization doesn't have this option in here, not to worry. Just go ahead and scroll to the bottom and you can search for it in the Living Atlas and add it to your map that way as well. So now that I have this key layer in my map, I want to start working with it. So I simply select it to engage this panel, the toolbar on the right. And I'm going to go ahead and collapse these things on the left in order to create a little bit more real estate while I'm working with my data. Now we're moving over to this toolbar on the right, which is the settings toolbar, the light toolbar. And now right away, we can see that this layer is symbolized by something already. The percent of population 18 to 64 years old in households with no computer. Now this is interesting on its own because we're immediately learning something new about our area, and we haven't done any configuration yet. But since we're interested in Harris County, we can easily filter this data to just show the tracts within our county. Now, traditionally, like Marianne mentioned, you'd have to know what all the settings are. Hopefully you knew all of the tricks, but nowadays, this is a much easier process. I can see if there's a county field within this layer, and look at that, there it is. So I can easily get to the field that I want and also search the values right away. I can either search for Harris County, but I can actually see that it's right here. So I can select it and even preview it before I've ever selected this filter. So once I click OK, now I'm just seeing the tracks within my area, and I want to start with the actual mapping of the different attributes in here. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and enter into the styles pane, which is also known as smart mapping. Now, the reason this is smart is that it's going to look at your fields before it ever maps them and only offer you suggestions based on the data type, such as a categorical field. It will give us things like types, or if we choose a numeric field, it'll give us options like color or size. So right away, I can see that field that it's being mapped, but I want to go ahead and replace this to map something else. I want a more general picture of the population that don't have access to computers. So I can click on the field and just start searching for the things that I want. Now, let's say I want to find all the fields that have no computer. Wow, this service has a lot of them, which is awesome. But here it is, households that have no computer. I want to just get a sense for that. But I want to learn more about that before I even start mapping. I can click this information button. Right away, I can see the field type, in this case, an integer. I can see that the person that hosted this added a field description, which actually tells me what a computing device means. And in this case, it's a desktop, laptop, smartphone, tablet, or any other portable wireless computer. So that's interesting. I think this is what I want to know in order to investigate the digital divide. I can also see that my county has 1,122 tracks, and I can get a sense for the min, max, and average. So before I've even started mapping anything, I can learn about basic information about the fields that I'm interested in. So I'm going to go ahead and replace that. And smart mapping is going to recognize that that was an integer, and it's going to offer me the counts and amounts size style by default. And now right away, I'm already seeing a kind of interesting pattern within the city. I'm starting to see these pockets, but the story is a little bit muddled. So what I can do is I can use what's called a theme to help refine the story being told with my map. So if I change this from high to low, which shows all of the data values, and instead use this above theme, which is going to emphasize anything over the statistical average, right away with just one click, I'm able to see a little bit more clearly this story that's happening within my county. If I want to learn more about the statistics, I can go in and see the data spread and those statistics that we saw earlier, but now in line with the way that the map is being symbolized. I can even make additional refinements, like changing the size of these symbols to, again, create more emphasis on those areas of need. And now the story is really starting to shine. But let's go ahead and iterate. Anyone who works with socioeconomic data will know that mapping a total count, like the total households that have no computer, can be skewed based on the fact that the patterns start to look like total population maps. So let's go ahead and also add a normalized attribute, the percent of households that have no computer. Again, I can search for a field, and I can see that there's quite a few in this one based on different attributes, but here it is, percent of households that have no computer, and I can add that. And right away, it's going to offer me a mapping style, but I want to move percent up to the color. So I can simply drag that up and it will swap these two fields. And now I'm seeing a percentage, a normalized attribute with color, and a total count, households that have no computer, as the size. So now I'm really starting to get an interesting narrative where I can see this percent put into place the pattern that we saw before. But let's go further. Let's go into the options to see what we can do. Right away, I want to do what we did before and go ahead and use that above style for the size. And let's go ahead and explore what's going on in our color options. And now here's where the gold mine is. Here we have the statistics for this attribute, all the color settings, and all sorts of different other things. Right away, we can see that it's showing us a statistically significant pattern where the data spread is being spread over plus or minus 1 standard deviation. So all the colors in this map are already showing us interesting information. But I might want to drag this around in order to emphasize the highest values in my map. Or if I have a number that's meaningful to me, such as a threshold like 30%, I can go ahead and type that in as well. But if I have made some choices that I maybe want to go back from, that's okay too. I can reset the slider positions to where they started and start back where I was, no problemo. Now, if I'm happy with my my choices here, I can go ahead and start to create more emphasis in this map, again, using a theme. Instead of using high to low, one of my favorites is the above and below. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to create a diverging color ramp where the average is by default in the center. And now 2 different colors help us see the highest and lowest patterns within our data set. So now we can really start to see what's going on within the area. But I'm not a huge fan of this color ramp. So let's go ahead and try some other ones. If we go into the color ramp options, it is so easy to try out different things and see your map dynamically change right in front of you by simply clicking the different options. But if you want a little bit more refinement, you can use the category. Maybe you want to find something that's better suited for a dark base map if we had a dark base map. Maybe you wanted to add green into your map. Or if you really wanted to make sure your map was colorblind friendly, you even have the option to choose all the ramps in that category. And again, we can easily make adjustments until we are happy with our map and we can move on. We can also do things like small changes, like change the symbol shape. Sometimes circles overlap a lot. Diamonds are an easy way that have a little bit less overlap in many cases. So with just a few clicks, we're starting to refine our map, explore things, and come up with a story that we can give to our manager to help tell this narrative about the digital divide. Now, say we hand this map to the manager and they say, that's interesting, but there's not quite an equity lens on this yet. We happen to know that our county has high rates of Black or African American populations as well as Hispanic populations. And my manager says, I want to see those things. And I say, that's okay, because it's easy to explore patterns in ArcGIS Online. I'm going to go ahead and replace these by searching for those 2 attributes that my manager mentioned. First, I'll start with the Black or African American population without computers, but I also want to find the Hispanic population that don't have computers. I can simply add those 2 attributes, and Smart Mapping is automatically going to recognize that those are 2 numeric attributes and give me options that are suitable. Now, one of my favorite styles when mapping 2 total counts, such as this, is dot density. This is a really interesting way to humanize your maps and tell a very interesting narrative about things, about this pattern where we can see the 2 different population groups and where they exist within the city or the county. We can also refine the legend to help us, again, humanize the topic where 1 dot equals 1 person. So that we're telling a very interesting story. We're seeing these kind of radial patterns within the county, and we're starting to really see where this digital divide is happening within the city. Another one of my favorite mapping styles when mapping 2 total counts is the predominant category style. Now, this is interesting because what this does is it tells us which one is largest, which one has the highest count. And so again, this is reaffirming these patterns that we've been starting to see of these kind of radial chunks within the county. And what this is also telling us is that there's many tracts within the city that don't have these population groups within them. So this is very interesting, and we're already starting to learn things about our area. We can even just easily swap this to the predominant category and size style. And now we can also see the sum of these 2 population groups easily within the map, and we can start to see this pattern really start to shine. Now, a new style that's available is the chart style. And what's cool about this one in comparison to predominance is that it doesn't just say which one is largest. It's actually going to give you a little pie chart that helps you visualize just how many of each of these groups exists within the area. You can, again, easily swap to a charts and SOTS option, and now it will give that same thing, that same style, but also by the sum of categories. I always encourage going into the options, and in this case, we can see all those areas that don't have any of these population groups. They're creating distraction. So let's go ahead and just make those more transparent, and maybe even go ahead and try some different color ramps. So again, this is so easy to simply explore, click, and learn more about your data sets by simply trying the different mapping styles. And now I'm going to end us with one more style, because imagine I show this map to my manager and they say, that's fine, but what I really want to see is the percent of the population within these two groups. And you say, that's fine, because I can easily just swap those out. I can search for those two fields. Let's go ahead and find the percent of Hispanic population that has no computer, as well as the percent of Black or African American population. Now we're mapping 2% variables. And now one of my favorite mapping styles when mapping 2% is the relationship mapping style. And what this does is it now is comparing the two patterns and showing me where that they converge and diverge. All the areas in orange have a high amount of Hispanic population, but less Black or African American. Areas in blue have higher Black or African American, but fewer Hispanic, and areas in brown have high of both. So this is interesting because now we're seeing where this equity lens is in comparison to the digital divide, and we're starting to see better where the two patterns overlap. Now, once my manager is finally happy with this map, I say, great, let's go ahead and create focus in our map by using what's called an effect. Now, there's a lot of different ways that we can emphasize patterns within our data. One of my favorites is the drop shadow. Now, you'll see when I clicked that, it simply added a drop shadow to my feature. But you can refine this a little bit more and create the emphasis that you want. You can even choose your own color or change the width. Another thing that we can do is we can rotate the colors on our map. Now watch this. By simply choosing hue rotate, we see in our legend our drop shadow and our color changes on the fly so that we can easily and dynamically change the map. And if we don't decide we don't want that, that's okay too. We simply turn it off. And now imagine I show this to my manager, I think I'm almost there, and they say, this is great, but we still want to see where the general pattern is within our area of where there's households without computers. And you say, that's okay, because I have what's called feature-specific effects. And now if we come in here, let's go ahead and simply show that percent of all households that don't have a computer. That way we can overlap the pattern that we already created with the relationship map, but now we can emphasize the areas that have above average values of no computers. We can easily refine the way that this emphasizes by choosing one of the pre-configured options. And right away, we're starting to now have emphasis on our map of these areas of high digital divide, and we're really seeing where there's areas of need in our area. So say we're finally happy with our final map, and we're going to want to go ahead and save this and share it with the world. So finally, we can easily share this as digital divide in Harris County. Save this map, and now there's a few different ways that we can share this with the world. We could just share this URL, but for many stakeholders, they don't need to see all of these different options on the side. We may want to create a more refined view of this final map, and that's easy to do. Now that we've saved it, we have the option to create all sorts of different things such as dashboards, story maps, or one of my favorite, which is instant apps. Now, what the instant apps are easy tools for sharing our maps. And if you don't know what you're looking for, that's okay too. If I know that I want users to interact with my data, I can select that option and it will give me instant apps that work well for my needs. Now, one of my favorites is the media map. And again, on this theme of trying things out, you don't even need to create this before you can see what it looks like. You can simply hit the preview button and it will give us our map with what it will look like in the app. And now this is a much more refined version because all we have is the legend, which we can configure to be open by default, and some basic navigation tools. So now in less than 20 minutes, we've been able to create a map from start to finish with no data. We've been able to explore different patterns within our area, and we're able to share out an app that's and test out different options so that we can share it to our final stakeholders. And now with that, now that you've become more familiar with Map Viewer and some of its configurations, I'm going to hand off to Jim, who's going to build on these basic skills to show what else is possible in Map Viewer. Go ahead, Jim.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Excellent. It's always a pleasure to follow Lisa's demo. I'm coming to you from my kitchen, and often I've had conversations with politicians, a sheriff one time, and others at this very kitchen table where I kind of show them what's possible in GIS. So it's a very comfortable scenario for me, and I hope you find it useful as well. I've always used GIS for what I can get out of it. And Lisa and I, we work on Living Atlas as we're users of the software. Like that's what we do all day long is we use Esri software to create maps and content, very similar to what Lisa showed in that excellent demo. Now, as I say, I've always been into GIS for what can I get out of it? And I've got 3 scenarios to share here in about 14 and a half minutes. So let's get to it. I get plenty out of Map Viewer because it encourages me to ask questions. So recently when there was a fire, a lot of people came my way because we had relatives who lived in an area. And I kind of want to share an experience I had in using this map as a wildfire map showing in California location of current wildfires from a feed. And that feed is from Living Atlas. And I can go to this layer, and you can do this with any web map you find. If you want to interrogate, hey, where did they get that layer? You can go to the layer. On the left side, click on the layer, and in the properties pane on the right side, you can go to the information bar and see where the source layer comes from. And if you touch that, it's gonna go out to the interwebs and it's gonna find the item card or the item page for this, and you can go see, where's this come from? In this case, it's from a layer called USA Current Wildfires. It's from NIFC and Irwin, and there's full description documentation about where this comes from. It's marked as an authoritative layer, meaning we recommend you can trust it, you can use it, it's gonna be here. And it's been tagged for curation in Living Atlas. So anything that's in Living Atlas has gone through a review process in terms of both its content and its description. So I see this layer and I think, oh, I want to use that. And I want to understand, I want to ask one question. Where are my assets in relation to this fire, this particular fire up in Northern California? And so there's many ways we might consider doing that. You know, a lot of people ask me, hey, where does Cousin Joe live relative to this fire? I'm like, well, where's Cousin Joe? You might consider asking it from a different perspective. If you are looking at where are my properties or where are the mobile assets, trucks and other things that are out there, you kind of want to know where they are. One of the nice features about Map Viewer is this What's Here feature where I right click on the map and it can tell me that this building, according to this data set, is a CarQuest Auto Parts, or I can right click on this one and it tells me this is Aztec Grill. I'm like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. Maybe I want to communicate to people, well, here's where the fire is and here's the approximate location of our assets. So I would go to add a sketch layer and in that sketch layer, I can choose any kind of representation of the points I'm going to drop on the map, pins or shapes, etc. And I can drop those pins onto the map. So I can put a pin there, and I can put a pin here, and that's it. They're done. They're on the map. It's not a big effort to create those locations, so that now I can start to communicate with people. Well, here's where our assets are relative to this fire. The layer itself is coming from, as we saw earlier, an official source, but I've changed some properties about it. And on any web map you open, you can go interrogate and say, hey, what did the person do to that source layer? And in this data or layer properties pane, it tells you, well, all of this information is coming from the source layer, but this web map has modified the pop-up and attributes. So that's cool that you can do that. You can reset at any time. If you want to go back to the source, well, that's what the source layer looks like. If you decide, oh, I regret my choice, I want to undo it, reload the web map. I didn't hit save yet. There's no damage done here. It's just a web map, and I can reset it to the original symbology. So how did that symbology get to where it is? If we look at the styles on this wildfire perimeters, we can see that it's just a basic polygon fill, nothing too dramatic about it. But one of the effects that makes it kind of work is I'll turn on and off this drop shadow. So you can see how that's having a nice effect. And then it's got a multiply blend method. So I'll show you my exact super secret technique for figuring out which blend method works best for my situation. This is unblended, where it's a solid polygon fill. My super secret technique of figuring out which blend method I want is to just use the down arrow and go through each of these to see which of these do I like. Do I want that effect? That's kind of cool. I'd say that's a candidate. The multiply effect is one I often recommend when you have a polygon that could benefit from seeing through to the underlying hill shading. You'll notice one other thing going on that's worth mentioning. The base map has been desaturated. It's just a world topographic map, and the blend effect I've applied is called luminosity. Here's the normal base map with color, but because I knew I'm going to have a lot of colors on this map, my policy is always strip out all the color you can and then make the important stuff earn the right to have color on your map. It has to earn it. We can't just keep pouring layer after layer after layer onto the map and hoping that the colors just kind of work out. So I recommend getting actively involved with that. Lastly, on this map, the satellite VIIRS data, this is thermal activity shown on the map. It's got a nice little glowy effect that works at multiple scales and kind of gives you a hint about where the hottest spots are currently. So what did I do to that layer? We went in, and on the effects, we've got a simple bloom, and you can play with the different strength of the bloom and know that it works at multiple scales. And then the other effect is a contrast. So we just boosted the brightness and contrast and boosted the bloom. I guess the way to think about it is, if this layer is important enough to have on the map, can we give it all the effects we want to have the maximum benefit to the user? Now, we were trying to answer the question, where are assets in relationship to this fire? One of the things that's big about wildland fires is we're trying to protect people and property. So it's kind of useful to have a map showing the actual census population, and that's a layer that we added here. These are 2020 census block centroids. And then on top of that, we're able to kind of query any polygon and say, well, what's the population of this perimeter? So if I query the bigger perimeter, let me see if I can get it. Well, we'll work with this one. The census 2020 population of that perimeter highlighted is 13 people, but we can also ask another question. How many people live within 2 miles of this current perimeter? It's a much bigger number, isn't it? So this is how you help tell the story of how successful fire protection is, wildland fire protection is going. We have this many people at risk as defined by that. Where is that occurring? It's just over here in the pop-up for the perimeters layer. An arcade expression lets you go and interrogate another layer, go get this other layer, generalize the fire boundary, intersect it, go get the sum of the population, go get the sum of household count, and then present those results. Next quick example. We often have data sets like this. Anyone ever worked with data set like this where there is so much data, the points are actually obscuring any pattern that's going on. Like I clicked right there, there's 59 car collisions in this 4-year period under that one point. And so if we kind of zoom in, it's kind of how do you see the forest for the trees? So I'll go to the layers. I'll choose this layer, locations of collisions. And I'll close this window to give me a little more space. And I'll just show you a couple of quick options. One, you can heat map it. So how do we apply a geographic approach to this data? One way is to start to explore. And it's relatively easy, as you saw, one click, one heat map, and then try out different color palettes to see which one seems to bring some aspect of the story out. You can see it's very inexpensive for me to try out different ideas here. I have all these color ramps available, and I can flip them to see, do I like this color ramp done this way or this way? Do I want more emphasis so that those hot spots start to emerge sooner or later? How is this going to work? And then how will it work at multi-scale? So we can start to see generally the concept that, wow, this data set, there's a lot of accidents out there, but you start to notice what right away? They seem to be happening more at intersections, which if you've ever driven, you can probably relate to that. So if I go, that's one way to kind of visually create a story around this data set. Another way is to use clustering. And with clustering, it's going to, with 1 or 2 clicks, instantly count up the number of accidents in an invisible grid, right, that it's overlaying on all that data. It's going to tell you those numbers. You can adjust the size of the clusters very rapidly so that you get a little more granularity. And you can see a little bit different pattern going on down here in the middle of the map, or you can be less granular and go the other direction. You've got full control over the labels and the pop-ups that this thing gives you. So when you click on one of these clusters, it tells you this has 12 features, but if you click on a cluster as only one, it'll just give you the data for that one feature. So that's kind of a nice option to tell a slightly different story about that data. And then lastly, there's another way to tell the story. You can still pop into Classic and go get the street center lines. What I did in Classic was I took the street center lines from a service that the County of LA was serving, and I created little 50-meter buffers around every street segment. And that's what you're seeing here. And then I counted up how many accidents occurred within each street segment. So when you do it that way, it's kind of interesting. If you showed all the data, the map would look like this. In other words, the maximum number of accidents on any street segment in this small sample was 95 accidents in one street segment. Don't want to live there necessarily. And the minimum was 1. But I want you to see how the story changes as I drag this up to the mean. Well, now I'm able to tell a story about how anything on this map that has any size to the street, they have a higher than average number of accidents according to this data set, which is pretty cool to be able to tell that story. And then lastly, that same data set, having summarized the count of points on each street segment, we can also do a little bit of simple math. As geographers and map makers, it's always good to think about, well, how do I tell whether this is a normal pattern or abnormal? And one way is to kind of take the count of something and divide it by a denominator that has some kind of logic to it. In this case, I kind of took a chance and I thought, well, I wonder how many accidents per mile of road, if that would be a useful way to visualize the data. And it turns out it is. That's what you're seeing. In color, we're using collisions per mile of road. And in size, reflects the total count of points. So you get a little bit of both story. And again, it turns out if you show all the data, the map looks this way. But as soon as you say, you know what, I think I'll choose an above pattern where only those street segments above the average get the biggest size, well, now I've got control, more control over this map than I had before. In fact, I think I'll bump this up to kind of 40 pixels wide. And now I suddenly see two large clusters. This big red cluster, I've been in that snafu before. Never had an accident in there, knock wood. So, but it is an area of concern. And then there's this other area where this street, Figueroa, this particular segment had 95 accidents during this time period. That's 628 collisions per mile of road during this time period. So now we have a metric we can work with, and we can visualize it and talk to it. And what I want you to think about is this map now gives policymakers, your teammates, a chance to talk about different strategies. Maybe the strategy you take for this area, seen as it involves an interstate, is different than the strategy you use on this surface street. And we note this very long street with a lot of accidents, but relatively few accidents, collisions per mile of road. Now, I omitted one cool thing that I wanted to show you. That's the benefit of a live demo. When you remember something, you can just go back to it. The filtering capability is pretty cool. It's live. So if I wanted to focus on just bicycle accidents, I can do that. I can say, show me all the bicycle accidents in this data set. Let's make sure we got the right layer. I fully believe in making mistakes in front of people because I don't know about you, but that's how I actually end up working sometimes. So yeah, I've got a bicycle field. I got several fields, and this just helps me confirm. Yeah, I want to work with this field. And by default, it says, well, I see one value in there. It's either null or yes. So as soon as I apply that, note how the map has changed. Or if I remove it, the map updates instantly. This is where we talk about your ideas can start to flow as you work with the data. My last example, this will only take a minute. You know, this map, we've been making this map for 50 years. You know, take a data set, in this case showing air toxics by county. And the question I'm trying to answer here is, where is air pollution a rural or suburban issue? Can you see the suburban counties and rural counties on this map? I mean, they're kind of inferred. Here's Asheville in the middle. So you can kind of infer that's a small city in North Carolina. I guess that's considered urban. But the reality is this map legend isn't really necessarily helping us. If we kind of work on this layer a little bit, just kind of by opening it up and go to the style, let's turn off classification. Why? Well, classification kind of says for all the values between 18.72 and 38, look, they're all the same, doesn't matter, right? If a county has a value of 19, it might as well have a value of 38. There's no difference. But that's a problem, because that might be where a lot of change occurs between those values of 18 and 38. So we like to talk about letting the data breathe a little bit, at least temporarily. Take that classification off so that you can see the more subtle gradations that are going on in your data, right? The histogram tells the tale. In this case, we're dealing with a percentile, so it's a pretty straightforward histogram to work with. But at least now I can kind of work with it and start to see more variation. And then I might switch it to an above and below pattern so that when I'm talking with executives or the public, I could say with confidence, the areas in magenta have worse air quality than the areas in blue. So if you live in a blue neighborhood, you're feeling pretty good, and Asheville is an area that has a little bit better air quality. And then to emphasize which are the urban and which are the rural, I've got this world population footprint, and there's similar layers out there. And I've applied a blend method called destination atop, right? There's all kinds of different blend methods you can try out. Destination atop has this cool effect of omitting everything that is not underneath this layer. That pixel does not get drawn. As a result, you see only the urban areas, right, in this map. And then the last step I would take to kind of fill this map out, because I do value the rural story, I would duplicate this layer, right? And therefore, if I've duplicated that layer, I can have a second layer available to me where it's also drawn. I put about 68% transparency on it, and there you go. I can kind of see the best of both worlds in this story now, where I can see where are the areas that are high air toxins in the air, and urban versus low air tox in the air and urban, but I also have a rural story there to tell. So I'll pause there and shift over. We've got there's many things we're happy about with Map Viewer. I've shown just a few. We could probably talk for hours on that, but we want to get to any questions you have. I prepared a little PowerPoint about all the various things in Map Viewer that cause us to have joy about the work that we get to do as GIS professionals. Things like this interactive filter and labels that are scale dependent. So at one scale you see one label. As you zoom in, that label starts to provide more and more information because there's additional room available, all controlled by you in Map Viewer. So there's many, many things documented in here. I kind of figured these are things you would want to know about. This PowerPoint is provided to help you kind of show to your fellow colleagues or perhaps management if they're thinking about doing more and more in ArcGIS Online Map Viewer. That's a pretty good way to go. So we'll provide a link to this in a second. And then got just one or two more things and we can get to questions. So we are very conscious that as we put more and more smart mapping styles and capabilities into Map Viewer, you probably would like to get to know them a little bit on your own time. And so we created this collection of story maps, each one focusing on a different smart mapping style with real world examples. So you can it's kind of like having Lisa come visit you and explain each of these styles. In fact, she wrote about a quarter of these, as did the rest of my team. In Map Viewer itself, on the left-hand toolbar at the bottom, there's a little button called Information, and you can open that pane up and see what's new, find some shortcuts, or some other information, places to get started. We really value your feedback. There's several places where you can get it to us. You can take a screenshot of this if you like, or especially if you're like me and you can't memorize URLs or refuse to. So take a screenshot that you can go to our community. Our tech support is excellent. Great place for you to submit ideas and issues, questions. And of course, our ArcGIS blog is where we document all the new things as they come out and talk about their usage. So I'll pause there and we'll take questions. I think, Barbary, maybe we want to throw to you on this.
Absolutely. And tons of questions. Thank you to the whole team here for an amazing presentation and lots of wonderful comments from our audience mirroring the same comment. So let's start with Marianne. Is it possible to share Map Viewer maps with users outside my organization?
Yeah, that is a great question. Yes, I think above anything else, perhaps, ArcGIS Online is a sharing platform. That's part of the story of ArcGIS Online, is not only bringing your data to a map and visualizing it and telling a story, or maybe doing editing and all of this rich data related activities. It's absolutely committed to making sure that you can get that information out to your constituents, your stakeholders. That could be members of the public, it could be just people inside of your own team. So some people choose to share their web maps to the whole world. And so that's one option that's available to you, of course. And we've seen that especially globally with the COVID-19 dashboards, for example. Lots of those have maps and charts and other visualizations that we've seen today tucked into them. And that really is a great example of sharing an ArcGIS Online Map Viewer map with the whole world, with the public. But what you might not see is that we also have a variety of options for sharing these maps just with your internal teams. So you wouldn't want the public perhaps to see all of your own inventory locations, for example, but you want other team members to be able to collaborate with you. And I said the word collaborate. We also have collaborations, which is when two ArcGIS Online organizations, maybe two federal agencies or state and local agencies, a variety of different kinds of community members or agencies, companies, commercial can share together. So their maps and their layers and their data and their content can be shared between them successfully and still not publicly available for the whole world. So short answer, yes, there are many, many ways that you can share your maps with many people.
Excellent. Jim, and a question for you, and we're going to go ahead and launch our poll here because we've got so many great tools that were shared today, and the team wants your feedback, like they said. So for you, Jim, does ArcGIS Online Map symbology carry over into ArcGIS Pro if you're opening the web map there?
Yeah, in most cases, the answer is yes. There are, of course, always the odd exception here and there, but you can expect that if you can see it working in ArcGIS Online, you should see the exact same thing in Pro. And if not, I want to hear about it.
Excellent. Marianne, another question for you. How can you export these maps?
Yeah, that's another good question. That sharing model that I just described is probably the most popular. We really encourage people to share the URL, just, the little link to your map, and people can access it that way. But exporting or printing certainly has a lot of use cases as well. And you can do that. There are a few options. You can print to paper, which to some people here probably sounds crazy. We never use paper. But if you're in emergency response, if you're in anything related to disaster relief, you may need paper. You may have boots on the ground that need to print something and seen it taped to the side of fire trucks. So certainly that's an option. You can also print or export to a variety of different image files, PDFs, JPEG, things of that nature, and of course, different sizes and formats.
Wonderful. Lisa, a question for you, actually a couple. Do these layers from Living Atlas consume credits?
That's a really good question, and the answer is it depends. Actually, Barbary, can you help me share my screen real quick?
Absolutely.
I can show you a quick example just so that you know exactly what to look for with this question.
That would be great.
So if you're on the Living Atlas website, which is livingatlas.arcgis.com, you can assume that things are publicly available to share unless you see a few things. So you'll notice these items tell you if the organization that shared the item is authoritative. That's one badge that's available on these items. But let's go ahead and check a different category such as imagery, where some of these items say this subscriber tag. Now, these don't require any credit consumption, but if you want to share those publicly, that's when you would need to embed your credentials or use some sort of method in order to share publicly. So subscriber, not credits. In general, no credits. The main items that utilize credits are the Esri demographics, and those have a badge that say premium content. So, if you see an item that says premium content, that one consumes credits. And just an FYI, that credit consumption is 1/1000th of a credit for each time you move the map. So it's very, very small. So just as a note, the Esri demographics are the only ones that consume credits, and it is pretty minimal. So using them is actually quite cheap. So that's the answer from me.
Good news. Another question for you. Someone would like to know how you created the high, low visualization and what that feature is called. That's
a great question. In smart mapping, for the, let's see here, the size and the color options, you'll see what's called a theme. So that high to low and below and above option is what's called a theme, and that can be chosen within the settings. And so, as we mentioned multiple times, go into the settings and try different things, and that's where you'll find themes.
Wonderful. Marianne, will layer effects be available in ArcGIS Enterprise?
Yes, I'm happy to say that layer effects absolutely will be available in ArcGIS Enterprise. I think the target for that right now is 11.0.
Okay, great. Jim, can you address, you mentioned things being verified, and folks want to know what's the difference between verified versus unverified data sets and maps? Folks need to know.
Yeah, when looking at an item in Living Atlas, it got into Living Atlas because a curator at Esri either helped create that content from an authoritative source that's been verified. This is the right source for Census 2020, for example, or Lisa's ACS data is direct from their FTP site, or actually their feed. So know that if it's in Living Atlas, because someone's taken a look at it and says, you can trust this, you can use it. Out of the universe of millions of layers, I think there's like 30 million layers in ArcGIS Online, about 6,000, 7,000 layers we've looked into specifically because we think they're of broad general use to a wide swath of GIS users. So in many cases, that means Esri might be ingesting the data like ACS, adding value to it and serving it. In other cases, we're just pointing to your servers. We're pointing directly to a number of census layers, for example, or NGDA sourced information. So we just know that you value having direct access to it. And it's interesting because I'm old enough to remember the only way you ever did anything with authoritative data is you go download it, you manage it, you do QA on what you touched.
Right.
WebGIS is different. You can directly access authoritative content direct from the source. So it just accelerates certain parts of your workflow. It's not an either or discussion, it's an and. You are likely to continue to download data. And as you get comfortable working with live services, it really opens up your world, especially with Map Viewer.
Well stated, thank you. Marianne, are there instances in which styling a map in Viewer Classic may be better or more efficient?
Oh, that's a good question. So many attending the webinar today are familiar with Map Viewer's predecessor, which is Map Viewer Classic, appropriately named today Map Viewer Classic, but it was known for many years as Map Viewer, so that can cause a little bit of confusion for people who are just joining the ArcGIS community. So the question is, are there times where it's better or more efficient to style a map using Map Viewer Classic? And the simplest answer is it really depends on your use case, but what I can share with you that might be helpful is today's Map Viewer is more modern technology than Map Viewer Classic. It's the next level. It has lots of rich features and functionality such as layer effects and a few other beautiful, beautiful visualizations that we saw today that Map Viewer Classic doesn't have and doesn't know how to interact with. There are many people who are using Map Viewer Classic and Web App Builder together, and I think we have some more questions about that coming up, but I'll mention it briefly here. Web App Builder is also on the same technology as Map Viewer Classic, and it has kind of not been superseded, that's not really the right word, but it has a partner product called Experience Builder. And Experience Builder is very similar to Web App Builder, but it's the more advanced modern technology, just like Map Viewer. So if you require Web App Builder for your workflows today, you're still looking at Experience Builder and you haven't really adopted it fully yet, you may be more comfortable in Map Viewer Classic, but you can still use Map Viewer to create your maps. You can use those maps in Web App Builder or Experience Builder or anywhere else. But what I keep in mind is that the more advanced capabilities like layer effects, for example, Web App Builder and Map Viewer Classic don't work with. Kind of a convoluted answer, I know, but we'll be happy to discuss that in greater detail. You're more than welcome to reach out to any of us and we can help you adapt that answer to your use cases.
Oh, that's great. And we are down to one more minute of our hour here. So let's dance through these a little quickly. Jim, how can we create a cluster map using different colors? For example, red to blue based on the...
I could show it real quick if you can enable me. You basically would choose the same smart mapping methods that you would otherwise show. So in this case, there we go. Do you see? Yep. Okay. So in this case, I chose the day of the week of the collisions to symbolize And the clustering says, okay, like this cluster of 240 in the middle, the predominant day of the week is Saturday. And you can see I chose a color palette, starts out on Monday and builds in color towards the weekend. And so you can see which areas are prone to weekend accidents versus weekday accidents. It's just another style. You just, as usual, pick a smart mapping style and then turn on clustering.
Excellent. So Marianne, a question for you. Do you have a timeline to add analysis capability?
Yes, yeah, that is a really good question. Thank you. Analysis tools, and I think there was a question about joining features and things like that as well. So doing a join falls into the category of analysis tools in ArcGIS Online. And Map Viewer Classic has all of the analysis tools that are available in ArcGIS Online. And people are often wondering if Map Viewer will also be able to perform joins and do other analysis related tasks that they've seen in Map Viewer Classic. And the answer is yes, that is coming. And our projected timeline is actually this coming fall. So you'll be happy to know that we're expecting to see analysis tools in Map Viewer in the autumn.
Folks, we have all these wonderful questions, and we are going to share those with the wonderful team here. Don't hesitate to reach out to them. They are actually excited about reaching out to you. Thank you again to the team. What a great session today. I'm excited about warming up my map skills as well. We hope that you go make it a great day. Tell a friend about Esri's Map Viewer and Directions Magazine. Thanks, everybody.